The river rushed beneath her, its cold fingers beckoning with promises of eternal peace. Sophia Lawson's tear-stained face reflected momentarily in the dark water before she closed her eyes and stepped forward into the abyss, the weight of her sodden dress immediately pulling her under. The current caught her like a hungry beast, dragging her down and away from the world that had brought her nothing but pain. Dakota Yeats saw the woman fall from the bridge just as he was leading his horse along the riverbank to drink. Without a second thought, he dropped the reins and sprinted toward the water, tearing off his coat as he ran. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The setting sun caught the copper in his dark hair as he dived into the churning river. The cold shocked his system, but years of ranch work had made him strong, and his powerful strokes cut through the current. He caught a glimpse of her pale blue dress swirling beneath the surface and drove himself deeper. His lungs were burning by the time his fingers grasped fabric. With desperate strength, he pulled her toward him and kicked for the surface. They broke through together, Dakota gasping for air while the woman remained limp in his arms. "Stay with me," he muttered, fighting the current to reach the bank. His boots finally found purchase on the muddy river bottom, and he half-dragged, half-carried her onto dry land, laying her gently on her back. She wasn't breathing. Dakota turned her onto her side, pounding between her shoulder blades until water spewed from her mouth. He rolled her back and pressed firmly on her chest, remembering what the old army medic had taught him during the war. "Come on," he urged, continuing the rhythmic compressions. "Not while I'm breathing. You don't get to die, not today." As if responding to his command, Sophia suddenly convulsed, coughing up river water and gasping painfully for air. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on the man leaning over her. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then realization dawned, followed by something that looked like disappointment. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely. Dakota sat back on his heels, water dripping from his soaked clothes. "Because every life's worth saving, madam. Even one that thinks it isn't." It was 1875, and Willow Creek, Colorado, was a town caught between its wild frontier past and an uncertain future. The railroad had arrived 2 years earlier, bringing with it a veneer of civilization that sat uncomfortably atop the town's rougher edges. Dakota had been there since before the tracks were laid, building his small cattle operation from nothing after returning from the war with little more than nightmares and a determination to find peace. Sophia shivered violently, her lips turning blue as the evening air chilled her wet clothes. Dakota removed his sodden vest and wrung it out, frowning at her condition. "We need to get you warm. My cabin's not far," he whistled for his horse, which had wandered upstream. The loyal Palomino trotted over, nickering softly. "Can you stand?" She nodded weakly, but when she tried to rise, her legs buckled. Without hesitation, Dakota scooped her up and placed her on his horse, then mounted behind her, supporting her with one arm while he took the reins with the other. "I don't want your help," she managed between chattering teeth. "Well, you're getting it anyway," he replied, nudging the horse into motion. "You can hate me tomorrow when you're not about to catch your death of cold." The ride to Dakota's cabin took less than 15 minutes, but Sophia was barely conscious by the time they arrived. The small log structure sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, with a corral for his horses and a smokehouse nearby. A thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney from the morning's fire. Dakota carried Sophia inside and laid her on his bed. He quickly rekindled the fire, adding kindling and logs until flames leapt up the chimney. Only then did he turn his attention back to the woman. "Madam, I don't mean to be forward, but those wet clothes need to come off." When she didn't respond, he grew more concerned. Her skin was ashen, her breathing shallow. Making a quick decision, he fetched his spare shirt and a blanket, then as respectfully as possible, removed her outer dress and petticoats, wrapping her in the blanket before removing the rest of her sodden garments from underneath. He hung her clothes by the fire to dry, then changed into dry clothes himself. After putting a kettle on to boil, he sat in the chair beside the bed, studying the woman he'd pulled from the river. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with auburn hair that had partly come loose from its pins. Her face, even pale and drawn, showed a delicate beauty that seemed at odds with the desperate act he'd witnessed. A gold wedding band glinted on her finger, raising questions in Dakota's mind about what had driven a married woman to such extremes. Sophia awoke an hour later to the smell of coffee and the crackling of a fire. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts, then memories came rushing back: the river, the cold, and the strong arms that had denied her escape. She sat up abruptly, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Easy there," came a deep voice from the corner of the room. "You've had a rough day." She turned to see the man who'd pulled her from the river sitting in a wooden chair, a tin cup in his hands. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time: tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and stubble shadowed his strong jaw. His eyes, a startling shade of green, regarded her with concern but no judgment. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy from the river water. "My cabin, about 2 miles outside of Willow Creek." He stood and approached, offering her a cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this. It's strong, but it'll warm you up." She hesitated before accepting the cup, her fingers brushing against his. "My clothes, drying by the fire. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but you were freezing." Sophia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she nodded. "Thank you," she said stiffly, though the words seemed to pain her. "Dakota Yeats," he offered, returning to his chair. "I run a small cattle operation nearby." She sipped the coffee, wincing at its bitterness. "Sophia Lawson, Mrs. Lawson," he acknowledged, noting the wedding band again. "Mrs.," she confirmed, twisting the ring absently. Then, with sudden vehemence, she pulled it off and placed it on the small table beside the bed. Though perhaps not for much longer. Dakota raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, he stood and moved to the stove. "I made some stew." "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." "I'm not hungry," she replied automatically. "Didn't ask if you were," he said mildly, ladling stew into a bowl. "But you're going to eat anyway. River takes a lot out of a person." He handed her the bowl and a spoon, then sat back down, watching as she reluctantly took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. "It's good," she admitted, taking another spoonful. "Don't sound so surprised. A man living alone learns to cook or starves." They fell into silence as she ate, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional stamp of horses in the nearby corral. When she finished, Dakota took the bowl and placed it in a wash basin. "Thank you for the meal," Sophia said formally. "And for—" She faltered, unable to express gratitude for something she hadn't wanted. "You don't have to thank me for pulling you out," Dakota said, understanding her hesitation, "but I won't apologize for it either." Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "You had no right to interfere." "Maybe not. But I couldn't just watch you drown. You don't know anything about me or my circumstances." "That's true," he conceded, "and I'm not asking, but whatever drove you to that bridge, there's always another way." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Is that what you think? That I just needed someone to tell me life is worth living? That I hadn't thought it through?" Dakota regarded her steadily. "I think you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and today it felt too heavy to bear another step. I've seen that look before in the war. Sometimes in the mirror." His honesty disarmed her and the anger drained away, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. "I'm very tired, Mr. Yeats." "Get some rest," he said, standing. "I'll sleep by the fire. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I'll take you back to town." Sophia nodded, lying back on the bed. Despite her intention to stay awake, to plan, the warmth of the cabin and the exhaustion of her ordeal soon pulled her into a deep sleep. Dakota watched her for a moment, noting how the tension eased from her face in slumber. Then he added another log to the fire and settled into his chair, pulling a blanket over himself. As sleep claimed him, he wondered what storms had driven this woman to the bridge and why he felt so compelled to help her weather them. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Sophia woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up, clutching the blanket around her. The cabin was empty, but a fire crackled in the stove, and her clothes, now dry, were folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy. The simple act of putting on her clothes a modest blue dress with a high collar restored some sense of normalcy, though the fabric still smelled faintly of river water. She ran her fingers through her tangled hair, wishing for a brush. The cabin door opened and Dakota stepped inside carrying a bucket of water. He paused when he saw her standing there, fully dressed. "Morning," he said, setting the bucket down. "Thought you might still be sleeping." "I've imposed on your hospitality enough," Sophia replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. "I should return to town." Dakota nodded, though a slight frown creased his forehead. "I'll take you after breakfast. Can't send you back on an empty stomach." Before she could protest, he was already at the stove, adding wood to the fire and setting a pan to heat. The domestic simplicity of the scene, this rough-hewn cowboy frying bacon and mixing batter for biscuits, struck Sophia as incongruous. Yet there was an ease to his movements that suggested this was routine for him. "You live here alone?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Just me and the horses," he replied, flipping the bacon, "and a few head of cattle in the north pasture. No wife, family." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my folks when I was young, never got around to starting a family of my own." He gestured to a small wooden table with 2 chairs. "Have a seat, coffee's hot." Sophia sat, pouring herself a cup from the pot on the table. The strong brew was a comfort, grounding her in the present when her thoughts threatened to pull her back to the bridge and the river. Dakota placed a plate before her: bacon, biscuits, and a spoonful of preserves, then sat across from her with his own. "Thank you," she said, picking up her fork. "You've been very kind, just doing what anybody would." "No," she said quietly, "not anybody. Not many would take in a strange woman, feed her, clothe her, and ask nothing in return." Dakota shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Eat up before it gets cold." They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness of their situation fading into the ordinary rhythm of sharing a meal. When they finished, Dakota collected the plates and placed them in a basin of water. "I need to saddle the horses," he said. "Take your time, we'll leave when you're ready." After he left, Sophia stood and moved around the small cabin, taking in the simple furnishings: the bed with its patchwork quilt, a bookshelf with a surprisingly varied collection, a desk with paper and ink. It was a bachelor's home, certainly, but clean and orderly. Nothing like the chaos she'd left behind. Her gaze fell on her wedding ring, still sitting on the bedside table where she'd placed it the night before. For 7 years, it had symbolized her marriage to Victor Lawson, prominent banker and respected citizen of Willow Creek. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple: wealthy, attractive, charitable. Only behind closed doors did the truth reveal itself. Victor's cruel words, his controlling nature, his dangerous temper. She picked up the ring, considering its weight in her palm. Last night, the river had seemed the only escape from a life that had become unbearable. Today, in the light of day, with the taste of Dakota's coffee still on her tongue, she wasn't so certain. She slipped the ring into her pocket and stepped outside. Dakota was saddling 2 horses in the corral, his palomino and a smaller bay mare. He looked up as she approached, his expression questioning. "I'm ready," she said, answering his unspoken query. "Though I must admit I'm not much of a rider." "Daisy here is gentle as they come," he assured her, patting the bay's neck. "She'll take good care of you." He helped Sophia mount, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her shorter legs, then swung up onto his own horse. They rode side by side down a narrow trail that wound through pine trees and across a small stream. Dakota kept the pace slow, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife: a hawk circling overhead, a pair of deer watching warily from the edge of the woods. "It's beautiful here," Sophia observed, the fresh air and peaceful surroundings easing some of the tightness in her chest. "It is," Dakota agreed. "That's why I settled here after the war, needed somewhere quiet to put myself back together." "The war changed you." He considered this, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Changed everyone who survived it, I reckon. Saw things no man should see, did things I'm not proud of, came back different." Sophia nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. Sometimes I think we're all fighting our own wars, just without uniforms or battlefields. Dakota glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. That's a poetic way of putting it, Mrs. Lawson, and probably true. Please call me Sophia, she said. After yesterday, formalities seem rather pointless. Sophia, he repeated, the name settling comfortably between them. The town appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the railroad tracks, with the church steeple rising above the rest. As they drew closer, Sophia's posture stiffened, the tension returning to her features. "Where should I take you?" Dakota asked, slowing his horse as they approached the outskirts. Sophia hesitated. The thought of returning to the house she shared with Victor filled her with dread, but she had nowhere else to go. "The millinery shop on Main Street," she decided. "My friend Sarah works there. She can help me sort things out." Dakota nodded, guiding his horse toward the center of town. The streets were busy with morning activity wagons delivering goods, townspeople going about their business, children running to school. Several people glanced curiously at them as they passed, no doubt wondering about the strange pair, the solitary rancher and the banker's wife, riding together in broad daylight. They stopped in front of a neat shop with bonnets and hats displayed in the window. Dakota dismounted and offered Sophia his hand, helping her down from the saddle. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Yeats," she said formally, aware of curious onlookers. "Dakota," he reminded her. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Will you be all right?" The concern in his eyes touched her. "I will," she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "If you need anything." He began, then seemed to think better of it. What could he offer her after all? They came from different worlds. "Goodbye, Dakota," she said, extending her hand. He took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Goodbye, Sophia." She turned and entered the shop, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. Dakota watched for a moment, then mounted his horse and rode away, trying to ignore the strange emptiness he felt at their parting. Inside the millinery shop, Sarah Miller looked up from arranging ribbons, her eyes widening at the sight of her friend. "Sophia, where on earth have you been? Victor's been looking everywhere for you." Sophia's heart sank at the mention of her husband. "It's a long story, Sarah." "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Sarah nodded, concern evident in her expression. "In the back room. Mrs. Henderson won't be in until noon." She led Sophia through a curtained doorway into a small workroom cluttered with hat forms and bolts of fabric. As soon as they were alone, Sarah took Sophia's hands in hers. "What happened? You look like you've been through an ordeal." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as the events of the past 24 hours overwhelmed her. "I tried to kill myself yesterday," she confessed, the words sounding strange spoken aloud. "I jumped from the bridge into the river." Sarah gasped, her grip tightening. "My God, Sophia, a man saved me, a rancher named Dakota Yeats. He pulled me from the water and took me to his cabin." "Dakota Yeats," Sarah's eyebrows rose. "The one who lives outside of town. People say he's a recluse." "He was kind," Sophia said, unable to find a better word for the quiet compassion he'd shown her. "But I can't go back to Victor, Sarah. I just can't." Sarah's expression softened. "I've told you before, you can stay with me and Thomas. Our spare room is yours for as long as you need it. Victor will look for me there first." "Let him," Sarah said firmly. "Thomas won't let him near you. Besides, a man like Victor Lawson cares too much about appearances to make a scene." Sophia wasn't so sure. The Victor that the town knew, the generous banker, the charming host, was very different from the man who had gradually isolated her from friends and family, who controlled every aspect of her life, and whose jealousy had turned to violence more than once. "I have no money of my own," Sophia said, voicing one of her many concerns. "No skills to earn a living." "You were a teacher before you married," Sarah reminded her, "and you've always had a gift for numbers. We'll figure something out." Sophia nodded gratefully, though the prospect of rebuilding her life from nothing was daunting. Still, it had to be better than the existence she'd been living or the watery grave she'd sought. "I need to get some things from the house," she said, "while Victor is at the bank." Sarah checked the clock on the wall. "It's nearly 10. He'll be there until at least noon. I'll come with you." Together they left the shop and walked the 4 blocks to the Lawson residence, a grand 2-story house with a wraparound porch, easily the finest in Willow Creek. Sophia's hand trembled as she unlocked the front door. Inside, everything was as she'd left it the day before, immaculate, orderly, and oppressively silent. "I'll only take what's truly mine," Sophia said, leading Sarah upstairs to the bedroom. She pulled a carpet bag from the closet and began filling it with clothing, a hairbrush, a small box of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. From beneath the mattress, she retrieved a book of poetry, a secret comfort Victor had forbidden, and a small amount of money she'd managed to hide away over the years. "Is that everything?" Sarah asked when Sophia closed the bag. "Almost." Sophia crossed to Victor's desk and unlocked the bottom drawer with a key she kept hidden in her jewelry box. Inside was a bundle of papers, bank statements, property deeds, and a journal where Victor recorded his business dealings, both legitimate and otherwise. She hesitated only a moment before adding them to her bag. "Insurance," she explained to Sarah's questioning look, "in case he tries to force me to return." They left the house as quietly as they'd entered, locking the door behind them. As they turned to leave, Sophia caught sight of a familiar figure across the street, Dakota, leading his horses to the livery stable. He saw her too, pausing in his tracks. For a moment they simply looked at each other, then Sophia offered a small smile before continuing on her way with Sarah. Dakota watched them go, a curious mixture of relief and concern washing over him. He'd been unable to stop thinking about Sophia since leaving her at the millinery shop, worried that he'd abandoned her to whatever circumstances had driven her to the river in the first place. Seeing her emerge from what he assumed was her home, carpetbag in hand and friend at her side, suggested she was taking steps to change those circumstances. It was none of his business, he reminded himself, turning back toward the livery. He had cattle to tend to, supplies to purchase, and a lonely cabin waiting for his return. Yet as he completed his errands in town, Dakota found himself listening more attentively than usual to the snippets of gossip exchanged by townspeople. It didn't take long to piece together that Sophia was married to Victor Lawson, the town's only banker and one of its most influential citizens. The Lawsons were fixtures of Willow Creek society, known for their charitable contributions and elegant gatherings. No hint of unhappiness or discord had ever been publicly acknowledged. But towns like Willow Creek had their undercurrents, whispers that never quite surfaced into open conversation. As Dakota sat at the counter of the town's only restaurant, eating a midday meal, he overheard 2 women at a nearby table. "Did you see Mrs. Lawson today, walking with Sarah Miller and carrying a bag?" "I did indeed. And Mr. Lawson was in quite a state at the bank this morning, asking if anyone had seen her. Apparently she didn't come home last night." "Well, I've always thought there was something strange about that marriage. She used to be such a lively girl before they wed. Now she hardly speaks unless spoken to. My Henry says Victor Lawson drives a hard bargain at the bank, not a man to cross in business. Or in marriage, I'd wager." Their conversation shifted to other matters, but Dakota had heard enough to strengthen his concern. He finished his meal quickly, paid, and stepped back onto the dusty main street. The bank stood prominently on the corner, a solid brick building that contrasted with the wooden structures surrounding it. Without quite deciding to do so, Dakota found himself crossing the street and entering its polished interior. A teller looked up as the bell above the door announced his arrival. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you?" "I'd like to speak with Mr. Lawson, if he's available," Dakota said, removing his hat. The teller hesitated, taking in Dakota's worn clothing and sun-weathered appearance. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's a matter that might interest him. Tell him it's about his wife." The teller's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and disappeared through a door behind the counter. A moment later, he returned, gesturing Dakota toward the office. Victor Lawson was a handsome man in his late 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with dark hair going silver at the temples. He stood as Dakota entered, extending his hand across a polished desk. I don't believe we've met, Mr. Yeats, Dakota Yeats. They shook hands, Lawson's grip firm and controlled. My teller says you have information about my wife. She didn't return home last night and I've been quite concerned. There was nothing in Lawson's manner to suggest anything sinister. His expression conveyed appropriate worry. His tone was measured and pleasant. Yet Dakota felt an instinctive dislike for the man. I found her by the river yesterday evening, Dakota said, watching Lawson's reaction carefully. She was in some distress. A flicker of something anger crossed Lawson's features before his composure returned. Is she all right? Where is she now? She's fine, Dakota assured him. I saw her in town earlier, seemed to be with a friend. Thank God, Lawson said, visibly relaxing. I've been worried sick. We had a disagreement yesterday and she left upset. I feared something might have happened to her. Dakota nodded noncommittally, unwilling to reveal Sophia's suicide attempt. Well, I just wanted to let you know she's safe. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Yeats. Not many would take the time. Lawson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gold coin, offering it to Dakota. For your trouble, Dakota stared at the coin but made no move to take it. Wasn't any trouble? Lawson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Nevertheless, I insist. Willow Creek needs more good Samaritans like yourself. Dakota reluctantly accepted the coin, not wanting to create a scene. If there's nothing else, I should be getting back to my ranch, of course. Lawson stood, indicating the meeting was over. Though if you happen to see my wife again, please tell her to come home. Whatever our disagreement, I'm sure we can resolve it. I'll pass that along if I see her, Dakota said neutrally, though he had no intention of doing so. Outside the bank, Dakota paused on the boardwalk, troubled by the encounter. Victor Lawson had said all the right things, expressed appropriate concern, yet Dakota couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The man's controlled demeanor reminded him of a horse trainer he'd once known who was all gentle words and sugar cubes in public, but used a whip when no one was watching. Troubled by these thoughts, Dakota collected his supplies and his horses, intending to return to his ranch. As he was loading his purchases, he caught sight of Sarah Miller leaving the millinery shop, locking the door behind her. On impulse, he approached her. "Excuse me, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You're a friend of Sophia Lawson's, aren't you?" Sarah regarded him warily. "Who's asking?" Dakota Yeats. He hesitated, unsure how much Sophia might have shared. "I helped her yesterday by the river." Recognition dawned in Sarah's eyes. "Mr. Yeats, yes, Sophia told me about you. Thank you for what you did." Dakota nodded. "I just wanted to make sure she's all right. I spoke with her husband at the bank and he seemed concerned." Sarah's expression hardened. "I'm sure he did. Victor Lawson is very good at seeming things he's not." "So I gathered," Dakota said quietly. "Look, I know it's not my place, but if Sophia needs anything, a place to stay, protection, whatever, my ranch is at her disposal." Sarah studied him for a moment, as if assessing his sincerity. "That's kind of you, Mr. Yeats. I'll let her know." She glanced around the busy street, then lowered her voice. "She's staying with my husband and me for now. Victor doesn't know yet, but he will soon enough." "Will she be safe there?" "Thomas is the blacksmith," Sarah said with a hint of pride. "He can handle Victor if it comes to that." Dakota nodded, somewhat reassured. "I'll be in town again next week for supplies. If you need to reach me before then, my ranch is about 2 miles east, just past the old Willow Creek crossing." "I'll remember that," Sarah promised. "And Mr. Yeats, Sophia may not say it, but what you did yesterday, it mattered, more than you know." As Sarah walked away, Dakota stood for a moment on the boardwalk, processing her words. Then, with a sense of unfinished business, he mounted his horse and headed home. The week that followed was one of the longest of Sophia's life. She stayed with Sarah and Thomas, sleeping in their small spare room and helping with household chores to earn her keep. News of her separation from Victor spread quickly through town, as such news inevitably does in small communities. Some people were openly sympathetic, others judgmental, but most simply watched with the avid interest of those hungry for drama in an otherwise predictable existence. Victor made no immediate attempt to force her return, though he did send a letter, delivered by his clerk, expressing his deep sorrow over their misunderstanding and his hope that she would come to her senses soon. The letter's cold formality, thinly disguised as concern, only strengthened Sophia's resolve. Sarah's husband, Thomas, a burly man with a gentle disposition, insisted on escorting Sophia whenever she ventured outside. His protection gave her the courage to visit the town's small law office, where she consulted with Mr. Harrison, the elderly attorney, about her options for divorce. The news wasn't encouraging. Divorce was difficult and scandalous, especially for a woman, and without proof of extreme cruelty or infidelity, her chances were slim. What about financial impropriety? Sophia had asked, thinking of the papers she'd taken from Victor's desk. If a husband has been involved in questionable business dealings, Mr. Harrison had regarded her with interest. That would depend on the nature of those dealings, Mrs. Lawson. If you have evidence of actual crimes, that might strengthen your position. Sophia spent evenings poring over Victor's documents by candlelight after Sarah and Thomas had gone to bed. Much of it was beyond her understanding, but she recognized enough to know that Victor had been manipulating loans and foreclosures to his advantage, particularly targeting small ranchers and farmers who couldn't fight back. The evidence wasn't conclusive enough to guarantee her freedom, but it might give her leverage throughout the week. Sophia found her thoughts returning frequently to Dakota Yeats. The memory of his cabin, simple but peaceful, contrasted sharply with the opulent prison her marriage had become. She wondered what he was doing, whether he thought of her at all, and why the brief connection between them seemed to linger in her mind. On Saturday morning, Sarah returned from shopping with news. "I saw that rancher in town today, Dakota Yeats. He asked after you." Sophia looked up from the shirt she was mending for Thomas. "He did. What did he say?" "He wanted to make sure you were safe," Sarah replied, watching her friend's reaction with interest. "Said to tell you his offer still stands, whatever that means." Sophia felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "He offered his ranch as a sanctuary if needed." "That's quite an offer from a man who barely knows you," Sarah observed, her tone neutral but her eyes speculative. "He's a good man," Sophia said simply. "Kind when he has no reason to be." Later that afternoon, as Sophia was helping Sarah prepare dinner, a commotion outside drew them to the window. Victor Lawson stood on the front path, impeccably dressed as always, his expression thunderous. Thomas stepped out to meet him, positioning himself solidly in front of the door. "I want to speak to my wife," Victor demanded, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "She doesn't want to speak to you," Thomas replied calmly. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Lawson." "You have no right to keep her from me," Victor said, his controlled facade slipping. "She is my wife." "And this is my house," Thomas countered. "You're not welcome here." Sophia watched, heart pounding, as the two men faced off. Victor was taller but slighter, his strength that of a man accustomed to wielding power through words and money rather than physical means. Thomas, by contrast, had arms thickened by years of hammering iron and a steadiness born of working with fire and metal. For a moment it seemed Victor might attempt to force his way past, but then his gaze shifted to the window where Sophia stood watching. Their eyes met, and Sophia felt a chill despite the summer heat. "This isn't over, Sophia," Victor called, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "A wife's place is with her husband. The law and God both agree on that." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode away, his back rigid with anger. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, placing a comforting hand on Sophia's arm. Sophia nodded, though she felt far from all right. Victor's visit had shattered the fragile sense of security she'd been building. "He won't give up," she said quietly. "He sees me as his property." "Thomas won't let him near you," Sarah reassured her. "You and Thomas have already done too much. I can't put you at further risk." Sophia moved away from the window, her mind racing. "I need to leave Willow Creek, at least until I can make legal arrangements. And go where?" Sophia hesitated, then made her decision. "I think I know a place." The next morning, Sophia rose before dawn, packed her few belongings, and left a note for Sarah and Thomas thanking them for their kindness, but explaining she needed to remove herself from their home for their safety. She slipped out while they were still sleeping, carrying only her carpet bag and the papers that were her sole leverage against Victor. The walk to Dakota's ranch was longer than she'd anticipated, the summer sun beating down mercilessly as she followed the road east out of town. By the time the cabin came into view, Sophia was exhausted, her throat parched and her dress dampened with sweat. Dakota was mending a fence near the corral when he spotted her approaching. He straightened, dropped his tools, and walked quickly to meet her. Sophia. "What are you doing out here alone?" She tried to smile, but the effort of the walk and the emotional toll of the past week suddenly overwhelmed her. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I didn't know where else to go." Dakota didn't hesitate. He took her carpet bag with one hand and offered his arm with the other. "Come inside. You look like you could use some water and rest." The cabin was as she remembered it, simple, orderly, peaceful. Dakota guided her to a chair, then fetched water from a bucket near the stove. Sophia drank gratefully, the cool liquid reviving her somewhat. "Victor came to Sarah's house yesterday," she explained once she'd recovered her voice. "He was intimidating. I couldn't stay there and put them at risk any longer." Dakota nodded, his expression grave. "You're welcome here for as long as you need. No one will bother you." "I can't impose on you indefinitely," Sophia protested. "Once I've sorted out my affairs, I'll find somewhere else." "There's no hurry," Dakota assured her. "The spare room isn't being used for anything but storage. Besides, I could use help with the cooking, never was much good at it." His attempt at lightening the mood worked. Sophia smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "I'm an excellent cook, as it happens. It's one of the few domestic skills I actually enjoy." Dakota smiled back, and something warm passed between them, a simple understanding, a recognition of shared isolation now broken. "Then it's settled. You'll stay, at least until you figure out your next steps." The next few days established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Sophia took over the cooking and much of the housekeeping, while Dakota tended to the cattle and horses. In the evenings, they shared meals at the small table, talking about their days and gradually revealing more of themselves. Dakota spoke of his childhood in Missouri, the loss of his parents to influenza when he was 12, his years working on various ranches before the war. He described the battles he'd seen with a reluctance that told Sophia he was sparing her the worst of it, and his struggle to find peace afterward. "The nightmares were the hardest," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Still get them sometimes, wake up thinking I'm back there." "What helps?" Sophia asked softly. Dakota considered this. "Time, work, being out here where it's quiet." He glanced at her. "Talking about it sometimes, though I never did much of that before." In turn, Sophia told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her brief career as a schoolteacher, and how she'd met Victor when he came to settle his deceased aunt's estate. "He was charming," she recalled. "Attentive in a way no one had ever been, made me feel special, chosen. I was flattered when he proposed, even though we'd known each other only a few months." "When did things change?" Dakota asked. Sophia sighed, watching a hawk circle lazily in the distance. "Gradually, then suddenly. First, it was little things suggesting I wear certain clothes, questioning who I spent time with. After we married and moved here, he began to isolate me. No visits to family in St. Louis, fewer and fewer friends locally. He monitored my spending, my reading, my conversations, and when I defied him." She trailed off, but Dakota understood. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Sophia nodded anyway. "Never where it would show. He's too careful for that." Dakota's jaw tightened, his hands forming fists on the arms of his chair. "No man has the right to treat a woman that way." "Many would disagree," Sophia said bitterly. "A husband's authority over his wife is sacred, or so I've been told repeatedly." "Not to me," Dakota said firmly, "and not to any decent man." His vehemence was comforting, a validation of what Sophia had known in her heart but had begun to doubt after years of Victor's manipulation. She reached across the space between their chairs and briefly touched Dakota's hand. "Thank you." That night, lying in the small bedroom Dakota had cleared for her use, Sophia felt a peace that had eluded her for years. The cabin walls might be rougher than those of Victor's grand house, the furniture simpler, the surroundings more isolated, but here she could breathe freely, speak her mind, move without calculating each step. Here, with this quiet, honorable man, she felt safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. On the fourth day of Sophia's stay, Dakota returned from checking his cattle to find her at the kitchen table, papers spread before her, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What's all this?" he asked, washing his hands at the basin. "Evidence," Sophia replied, looking up. "Victor has been manipulating foreclosures, particularly on smaller ranches and farms. He denies loan extensions that should be granted, then acquires the properties at a fraction of their value through a third party." Dakota frowned. "That's dishonest, but is it illegal?" "Some of it may be," Sophia said, showing him a particular document. "These signatures don't match. I think he's been forging documents when necessary. And here," she pointed to another paper, "he's lending bank money to himself through a false name, then using it to purchase foreclosed properties." "That sounds like fraud," Dakota said, studying the papers with new interest. "Have you shown these to anyone else?" "Just the lawyer in town, mister." "Harrison, he said it might be enough to give me leverage for a divorce, but not necessarily enough to bring criminal charges." Sophia sighed. "Victor is well connected. The bank examiners who visit are his friends from Denver. And without me as a witness, willing to testify about what I've seen and heard, the documents alone may not be conclusive." Dakota sat across from her, his expression serious. "You know he won't let this go easily. Men like that, who see women as possessions, they don't just walk away." "I know," Sophia acknowledged, "but I can't go back to that life. I won't." "You shouldn't have to," Dakota agreed, "but we need to be prepared. Victor knows you're not with the Millers anymore. It won't take him long to figure out where you've gone." As if his words had conjured the threat, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Dakota moved swiftly to the window, then stepped back, his expression grim. "Looks like we're about to have company," he said quietly. "Victor and 2 other men, stay inside." Heart pounding, Sophia gathered the documents and hurried to hide them in her room. When she returned to the main room, Dakota had taken his rifle from the wall and was checking its loading. "I don't want any shooting," Sophia said anxiously. "Neither do I," Dakota assured her. "But I want them to know I'm prepared to defend what's mine." The emphasis he placed on the last word sent an unexpected thrill through Sophia. It wasn't possessive in the way Victor's claims had been. It was protective, a declaration that his home, and by extension, she was under his care. Dakota stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. Victor was in the lead, with the bank's clerk and another man Sophia didn't recognize flanking him. "Mr. Lawson," Dakota called, his voice neutral but firm, "this is a surprise." Victor reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his gaze traveling from Dakota to the rifle and back. "Mr. Yeats, I believe my wife is staying with you?" "I have a guest, yes," Dakota acknowledged, "but I'm not sure your wife is the right way to address her anymore." Victor's face tightened with anger. "Our marriage is a matter between Sophia and myself, not some cowboy who's overstepping his bounds. Seems to me you're the one overstepping, coming onto my property uninvited," Dakota replied evenly. "I've come to take Sophia home where she belongs," Victor stated, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "This little adventure of hers has gone on long enough." "That's not your decision to make," Dakota said. "It's hers." Victor's composure slipped further, his voice rising. "She is my wife. The law gives me the right to determine where she lives, who she associates with. You have no right to interfere in our marriage." "I have every right to protect someone seeking refuge on my property," Dakota countered, "especially from a man who's shown he can't be trusted with her welfare." Victor's face flushed with rage. "How dare you imply I'm not implying anything?" Dakota interrupted. "I pulled her from the river, remember? I saw the bruises. I know exactly what kind of man you are." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Victor's companions shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, exchanging glances. Clearly, they hadn't been fully informed about the situation they were riding into. "Sophia," Victor called, his gaze moving past Dakota to the cabin door. "Come out here now, we're going home." Inside, Sophia stood frozen, fear battling with a growing anger. For 7 years, she had obeyed that commanding tone, flinched from that cold gaze. She had made herself small, accommodating, invisible. She had surrendered her will to avoid his displeasure, no more. With steady steps, she walked onto the porch, positioning herself beside Dakota. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Victor." Victor's expression shifted, the anger receding behind a mask of concern. "Darling, you're not thinking clearly. Whatever grievances you have, we can discuss them at home. This situation is inappropriate and embarrassing for both of us." "The only thing embarrassing me is your behavior," Sophia replied, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm not coming back, ever. I've consulted with Mr. Harrison about divorce proceedings." "Divorce?" Victor laughed incredulously. "On what grounds? No judge will grant a divorce simply because a woman is having a tantrum." Sophia smiled thinly. "Mr. Harrison thinks otherwise, especially given the evidence of financial impropriety I've provided him. Copies of your private ledgers, the forged documents, the records of your dealings with Mr. Shepard as your front man." The color drained from Victor's face. "You're bluffing." "Would you like me to show your companions the papers?" Sophia challenged. "I'm sure they'd be interested to learn how their employer really conducts business." Victor's companions were indeed looking at him with new wariness. The clerk, in particular, seemed deeply uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing the potential implications for his own position. "This isn't over," Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've stolen confidential bank documents. That's a crime. And you," he turned his gaze to Dakota, "harboring a thief, interfering with a man's rightful authority over his wife, there will be consequences." "I'll take my chances," Dakota said calmly. "Now I think it's time you left my property." For a tense moment, it seemed Victor might refuse. Then, with a final cold glare at Sophia, he wheeled his horse around. "Let's go," he barked at his companions, spurring his mount into a gallop. The other two followed, looking relieved to be leaving. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Sophia sagged against the porch railing, her brief courage giving way to shaking limbs and a racing heart. Dakota set his rifle aside and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "That's what makes it brave." His hand moved from her shoulder to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Being afraid but standing your ground anyway." Sophia looked up at him, struck by the admiration in his eyes. No one had looked at her that way in years, as if she were strong, capable, worthy of respect. Certainly not Victor, who had systematically undermined her confidence and independence from the moment they wed. "He'll come back," she said, "or try something else. He's not a man who accepts defeat." Dakota nodded, his expression grave. "I know, but you're not alone anymore. We'll face whatever comes together." The promise in those simple words, "we'll face whatever comes together," warmed Sophia in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the offer of protection, though that was part of it. It was the acknowledgement that she had an ally, someone who saw her struggle and chose to stand beside her rather than turn away. As they returned to the cabin, Sophia was acutely aware of Dakota's presence beside her, the quiet strength of him, the gentle way he held the door, the respect with which he treated her. In Victor's grand house, she had been a possession, an ornament to be displayed and controlled. Here, in this simple cabin with this honest man, she was becoming herself again, the woman she'd been before, and perhaps someone new as well. The days that followed were marked by a heightened vigilance. Dakota never went far from the cabin, keeping his rifle close at hand. He taught Sophia how to use it too, taking her behind the barn where he'd set up targets on fence posts. "Stand with your feet shoulder-width apart," he instructed, positioning himself behind her. "Hold it firm against your shoulder, that's it." His arms came around her, adjusting her grip on the weapon. Sophia was intensely conscious of his proximity, the warmth of his chest against her back, the gentle pressure of his hands guiding hers, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. Now take a deep breath, he continued, his voice close to her ear. Sight along the barrel. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger gently, don't pull it. Sophia did as instructed. The rifle's report was louder than she'd expected, the recoil pushing her back slightly against Dakota's solid frame. To her surprise, the bullet struck the target, not in the center but close enough to be effective. Good, Dakota said approvingly. Now let's do it again. They practiced until Sophia could consistently hit the target, her confidence growing with each successful shot. It was empowering to know she could defend herself if necessary, that she needn't rely solely on Dakota's protection. In the evenings, they continued to talk, their conversations ranging widely: books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. Dakota, Sophia discovered, had a surprising knowledge of literature for a man who'd had little formal education. He'd been reading his way through the classics for years, ordering books whenever he went to Denver for supplies. There's not much to do out here in the winter, he explained. Reading keeps me sane when the snow's piled high and the days are short. What's your favorite? Sophia asked, genuinely curious. Dakota considered this. Shakespeare, maybe, or Dickens. I like how they see people, the good and the bad, together, all mixed up. Like real life, Sophia observed. Exactly, he smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. What about you? What do you like to read? Poetry, Sophia admitted. Wordsworth, Keats. Victor thought it was frivolous. He preferred that I read improving literature sermons, household management guides. Dakota snorted. Man sounds like he was afraid you might get ideas of your own. That's exactly what it was, Sophia agreed, warming to the subject. Any independence on my part was seen as a threat, a challenge to his authority. Even having my own opinions about books was too much. Can't imagine living that way, Dakota said, trying to control another person's thoughts. It happens gradually, Sophia explained. First, it's little things that seem reasonable, preferences about clothing or food, then it's friends, activities. Before you know it, your world has shrunk to the size of his approval. Dakota reached across the table and took her hand. I'm glad you broke free. The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent warmth spreading up Sophia's arm. So am I, she whispered. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Dakota gently released her hand and stood, breaking the spell. I should check on the horses before turning in. Sophia watched him go, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it. The attraction she felt toward him was both frightening and exhilarating. Frightening because she was still legally married, still vulnerable. Exhilarating because it was honest and uncomplicated in a way her relationship with Victor had never been. As she prepared for bed that night, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror Dakota had hung in her room. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had stepped off the bridge 2 weeks ago. Her eyes were clearer, her posture straighter, her expression more resolute. She was changing, healing, growing stronger. And much of that change, she knew, was due to the man sleeping on the other side of the cabin wall, the man who had pulled her from the river and said, "Not while I'm breathing." A week passed without further incident, though the tension never fully dissipated. Dakota rode into town twice, once to deliver a letter from Sophia to Mr. Harrison, updating him on the confrontation with Victor, and once to collect supplies and gather news. He returned from the second trip with troubling information. Victor's been telling people you're mentally unstable, he reported as they sat at dinner. Says you've been suffering from melancholy and delusions, that you need medical treatment. Sophia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. It's a common tactic. Husbands who want to control troublesome wives often label them as hysterical or insane. Well, it's not working as well as he might hope, Dakota continued. Sarah Miller has been outspoken in your defense, and apparently several other women in town have started sharing stories about Victor's controlling behavior toward you. Really? Sophia was genuinely surprised. She had always believed her marital troubles were private, invisible to others. People notice more than you think, Dakota said. The banker's wife never visiting friends without her husband, never speaking freely in public. Folks saw it. They just didn't know what to do about it. Sophia absorbed this information, a mixture of emotions washing over her. "What else did you hear?" Dakota hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Victor's filed a complaint with the sheriff, claiming you stole bank documents. Sheriff Jenkins says he'll have to investigate, but he's in no hurry. Seems he's not particularly fond of Victor." "The documents are legally mine," Sophia insisted. "They were in our home, and as his wife, I had every right to access them." "I'm not saying you didn't," Dakota assured her. "Just letting you know what's happening in town." Sophia nodded, pushing her food around her plate. "I need to resolve this. I can't hide out here forever looking over my shoulder." "You're not hiding," Dakota corrected her. "You're regrouping. There's a difference." His faith in her was touching, but Sophia knew he was partly right. She couldn't simply wait for Victor to give up or for the legal system to slowly grind toward justice. She needed to take more active steps toward securing her freedom. The next morning, she wrote 2 letters. The first was to Mr. Harrison, asking him to proceed with divorce filings as quickly as possible, offering to testify about Victor's financial improprieties if necessary. The second was to her brother in St. Louis, whom she hadn't contacted in years due to Victor's interference. She explained her situation and asked if he could send money for a train ticket east should she need to leave Willow Creek. Dakota offered to deliver the letters himself, but Sophia insisted on accompanying him. "I can't stay hidden away forever," she said firmly. "Besides, I need to speak with Mr. Harrison in person." Reluctantly, Dakota agreed. They rode into town together the following day, Sophia wearing a simple dress borrowed from Sarah Miller, who was of similar size. It felt strange to be out in public again after weeks at the ranch, and she was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them down Main Street. Mr. Harrison welcomed them into his office, his elderly face creased with concern. "Mrs. Lawson, I was about to send word to you. Your husband has filed for a writ of replevin to recover what he claims is stolen property, and he's threatening to petition for a sanity hearing." Sophia's heart sank, though she'd half expected this development. "Can he do that?" "He can try," Mr. Harrison said. "But I've already filed your petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty and filed counter-allegations regarding the bank documents. The judge will hear all sides before making any determinations." "When?" Dakota asked, his expression grim. "Next Tuesday," the lawyer replied. "Judge Parker will be in town for the regular circuit court session. 5 days. Less than a week to prepare her case, gather her courage, and face Victor in open court." Sophia felt a momentary panic, then steeled herself. "What do I need to do, Mr. Harrison?" Outlined the legal proceedings, explaining what testimony she would need to provide and how the documents might be used. As they talked, Sophia became increasingly aware of Dakota's steady presence beside her, his occasional questions demonstrating a clear-headed understanding of the situation. "You should know," Mr. Harrison added as they were preparing to leave, "that your husband has hired Mr. Fletcher from Denver to represent him. He's a formidable attorney with connections to the Territorial Supreme Court." "Victor always buys the best," Sophia said bitterly, "but money can't purchase truth." "Indeed not," Mr. Harrison agreed, "and Judge Parker is known for his fairness. If your testimony is compelling and the documents support your claims, you have a good chance of securing at least a legal separation, if not a full divorce." As they left the lawyer's office, Sophia felt both determined and exhausted. The prospect of publicly detailing Victor's cruelty, of facing his attorney's attempts to paint her as unstable or dishonest, was daunting. But the alternative, returning to that cold, controlled existence, was unthinkable. "Let's get something to eat before we head back," Dakota suggested, noting her pallor. "You need to keep your strength up." They entered the town's small restaurant, aware of the curious glances from other patrons. Dakota guided Sophia to a table in the corner, positioning himself so that his back was to the wall and he could see the door, a habit from his war days, she suspected. They had just received their food when the door opened and Victor walked in. He paused, scanning the room, his gaze hardening when it fell on Sophia and Dakota. After a moment's hesitation, he approached their table, impeccably dressed as always, his manner outwardly cordial. "Sophia," he greeted her, ignoring Dakota entirely, "you're looking well." "Victor," she acknowledged stiffly. "If you'll excuse us, we're eating," he smiled thinly. "Of course, I won't disturb your meal. I simply wanted to mention that I've spoken with Dr. Maxwell about your condition. He's quite concerned and has agreed to examine you after the hearing on Tuesday." The implied threat was clear. If the legal proceedings didn't go his way, Victor intended to pursue the claim of mental instability. A doctor's certification of such could result in Sophia being committed to an asylum where she would have no rights at all. "There's nothing wrong with my mind," Sophia stated clearly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Dr. Maxwell will find me perfectly sane, provided he conducts an honest examination rather than simply writing what you pay him to write." Victor's composure slipped momentarily, anger flashing in his eyes. "You're only making things worse for yourself, Sophia. Consider your position carefully before Tuesday. There's still time to come home to put this unfortunate episode behind us." "She's not going anywhere with you," Dakota said, speaking for the first time. "Not now, not ever." Victor finally acknowledged him with a cold stare. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Yeats." "I'm making it my concern," Dakota replied evenly. For a tense moment, the two men locked eyes across the table, then Victor straightened, adjusting his jacket with practiced nonchalance. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that." With a final, warning look at Sophia, he turned and left the restaurant. A murmur of conversation rose among the other diners who had been openly watching the confrontation. Sophia's appetite had vanished, but she forced herself to eat, knowing she needed to maintain her strength for the days ahead. "He's trying to intimidate you," Dakota observed quietly. "I know," Sophia replied. "It's what he does best, creating fear, making threats, using his position and connections. It's how he's always controlled me." "Not anymore," Dakota said firmly. "Now you have people on your side. You're not facing him alone." His words bolstered her flagging courage. "Thank you for being here," she said softly. "I'm not sure I could do this without you." Dakota's hand found hers under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You could," he said with conviction. "You're stronger than you know, but you don't have to." The days leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Sophia spent hours with Mr. Harrison, going through the documents and practicing her testimony. Dakota accompanied her to these meetings, offering moral support and occasionally practical insights about banking practices he'd observed during his own dealings with financial institutions. Each night, they returned to the ranch, where the familiar routine of caring for animals and preparing meals provided a welcome respite from the stress of the upcoming legal battle. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, as the shared crisis stripped away conventional barriers. On the night before the hearing, they sat on the porch swing Dakota had built years earlier, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. A gentle summer breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "What will you do?" Dakota asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "After tomorrow, I mean, if things go your way." Sophia considered the question. It was one she'd been asking herself repeatedly. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I could go to my brother in St. Louis, I suppose, start over there." Dakota nodded, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "That makes sense. But I don't think I will," Sophia continued, surprising herself with the certainty that suddenly filled her. "Willow Creek is my home now, for better or worse. I have friends here, Sarah and Thomas, Mrs. Abernathy at the library. I was a teacher before I married Victor. Perhaps I could teach again." "You'd stay in town?" Dakota asked, something like hope coloring his voice. "Even with the memories?" Sophia turned to face him, gathering her courage. "I've made new memories these past weeks." "Better ones?" Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them seemed to crystallize into something tangible, something neither could deny. "Sophia," Dakota began, then hesitated. "I know this isn't the right time. You're still married, still fighting for your freedom. But I need you to know." "I know," she interrupted gently, placing her hand on his. "I feel it too." He turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her more delicate ones. "When this is over," he promised, "when you're truly free, we'll talk about what comes next." "No rush, no pressure, just possibility." "Possibility," Sophia repeated, savoring the word. After years of confinement, of having her future dictated by another, the open-endedness of possibility was the most beautiful concept she could imagine. They sat in companionable silence until the night air grew cool, then reluctantly went inside to prepare for the momentous day ahead. The courthouse in Willow Creek was a simple wooden building that also served as the town hall and occasionally as a church when the regular chapel was being repaired. By 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, it was filled to capacity, the town's citizens having abandoned their regular duties to witness what promised to be the most dramatic legal proceeding in recent memory. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with a reputation for no-nonsense justice, called the court to order promptly at 10. Victor sat at one table with his attorney, Mr. Fletcher, a silver-haired gentleman in an expensive suit who emanated confident authority. Sophia and Mr. Harrison occupied the other, with Dakota seated directly behind them in the first row of spectators. "We have before us two matters," Judge Parker announced. "First, a petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Sophia Lawson against her husband, Mr. Victor Lawson, on grounds of cruelty. Second, a complaint by Mr. Lawson against Mrs. Lawson for the theft of bank documents and a counterclaim regarding financial impropriety. We will hear all testimony before rendering decisions on these interrelated matters." The proceedings began with Mr. Harrison presenting Sophia's case for divorce. She took the stand, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she detailed the progression of Victor's controlling behavior from isolation to verbal abuse to physical violence. "He was careful never to leave marks where they would show," she explained. "A blow to the stomach, a push that caused me to fall against furniture. Once, he held my head underwater in the bathtub until I nearly lost consciousness because I had spoken to a male client at a bank function without his permission." A murmur ran through the courtroom at this revelation. Sophia continued, describing the psychological torment of living under constant scrutiny and criticism, the gradual erosion of her confidence and independence, and finally, her desperate attempt to end her suffering by jumping into the river. "And who pulled you from the river, Mrs. Lawson, Mr. Harrison asked. "Mr. Dakota Yeats," Sophia replied, her gaze briefly meeting Dakota's in the audience. "He saved my life, though at the time I wasn't grateful for it. When Mr. Fletcher cross-examined her, his approach was measured but relentless, designed to cast doubt on her stability and truthfulness. "Mrs. Lawson, did you ever seek medical attention for these alleged injuries?" he asked. "No," Sophia admitted. "My husband wouldn't allow it." "Convenient, Mr. Fletcher observed. "So there are no medical records to corroborate your claims of physical abuse." "There are no records because Victor ensured there would be none," Sophia countered. "That was part of his control." Mr. Fletcher shifted tactics. "You've admitted to attempting suicide by drowning. Would you agree that this indicates a disturbed state of mind?" Sophia took a deep breath. "I would agree that it indicates the desperate state I had been driven to by years of abuse. When you're trapped in a cage with no visible way out, death can seem like the only escape." "A poetic analogy," Fletcher said dismissively, "but hardly evidence of a sound mind making rational decisions." The questioning continued, with Fletcher attempting to portray Sophia as emotionally unstable, prone to exaggeration, and vengeful toward her husband. Though shaken, she maintained her composure, answering truthfully and directly. Next came the testimony regarding the bank documents. Mr. Harrison presented the papers Sophia had taken, explaining the patterns they revealed loans denied to struggling ranchers who shortly thereafter lost their properties to foreclosure, only to have those same properties purchased by a Mr. James Shepard, who, evidence suggested, was acting as Victor's proxy. "Mr. Lawson claims these documents were stolen," Harrison stated. "Mrs. Lawson maintains they were legally in her possession as documents kept in the marital home." Victor took the stand, portraying himself as a concerned husband whose mentally fragile wife had become paranoid and delusional. He denied any abuse, suggesting that Sophia's injuries had been self-inflicted during episodes of hysteria. Regarding the bank documents, he insisted they were confidential bank property that she had no right to access or remove. "I've only ever wanted what's best for Sophia," he claimed, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "Her mental health has been declining for some time." This latest episode stealing documents, making wild accusations, attempting to end her life only confirms my fears about her condition. As the testimony continued, with witnesses called on both sides, Sophia found herself drawing strength from Dakota's steady presence behind her. Whenever her courage faltered, she would glance back to find his unwavering gaze, his slight nod conveying his belief in her. Sarah Miller testified about the changes she'd observed in Sophia after her marriage, the withdrawal from friendships, the nervous deference to Victor, the occasional bruises glimpsed when Sophia's sleeve rode up or her collar shifted. Thomas spoke of Victor's threatening behavior at their home. Several other townspeople came forward with similar observations. Perhaps most surprisingly, Victor's clerk, Mr. Simmons, testified about banking practices he'd witnessed that troubled him, particularly the pattern of foreclosures and subsequent purchases by Mr. Shepard. "I raised my concerns with Mr. Lawson," Simmons stated. "He told me it was not my place to question bank policy and threatened to dismiss me if I mentioned it again." By late afternoon, all testimony had been heard. Judge Parker, who had listened attentively throughout, removing his spectacles occasionally to pinch the bridge of his nose, called for closing statements. Mr. Fletcher argued eloquently that Sophia's claims were unsubstantiated, the product of a disturbed mind seeking to punish a husband who only wanted to care for her. He painted Victor as a pillar of the community, a successful businessman being targeted by a vindictive woman and an opportunistic cowboy. Mr. Harrison countered by weaving together the testimonies they'd heard, showing the pattern of control and abuse, and connecting it to Victor's similar pattern of controlling and manipulating financial matters. "The same man who believes he can bend rules and people to his will in business has applied those same tactics to his marriage," he concluded. "Mrs. Lawson asks only for her freedom and the opportunity to rebuild her life." Judge Parker announced he would consider all testimony and render his decision the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, Sophia felt drained but strangely peaceful. She had spoken her truth, brought the darkness of her marriage into the light. Whatever the judge decided, she had reclaimed her voice. Dakota escorted her back to the ranch, their conversation minimal, both lost in thoughts about what the next day might bring. That night, Sophia slept more soundly than she had in years, as if the act of publicly naming her abuse had somehow loosened its grip on her. The courthouse was even more crowded the next morning, with people standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. Judge Parker entered precisely at 10, his expression giving no hint of his decision. "Having considered all testimony and evidence in these matters," he began, "I am prepared to render judgment regarding the petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Sophia Lawson. I find that sufficient evidence exists to support her claims of cruelty. The consistent testimony of multiple witnesses regarding changes in Mrs. Lawson's demeanor and social interactions following her marriage, combined with observed instances of controlling behavior by Mr. Lawson, lend credibility to her account." Sophia felt a surge of hope, her hand instinctively seeking Dakota's where it rested on the rail behind her. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "Furthermore," Judge Parker continued, "I find Mrs. Lawson to be of sound mind, her testimony coherent and consistent. The attempt to end her life, while troubling, appears to have been the result of genuine despair rather than mental instability." Victor's face had gone rigid, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. Mr. Fletcher was scribbling notes rapidly, presumably already planning an appeal. "Regarding the bank documents," the judge went on, I find that as items kept within the marital home, Mrs. Lawson had legal access to them. Therefore, no theft occurred. The contents of these documents, while not conclusively proving fraudulent activity, raise serious concerns that merit further investigation by appropriate banking authorities. Judge Parker adjusted his spectacles before delivering his final ruling. I hereby grant Mrs. Sophia Lawson's petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. Mr. Lawson will pay alimony in the amount of $20 per month for a period of 1 year to allow Mrs. Lawson to establish herself independently. Mrs. Lawson will retain her personal property and effects. The marital home and all business interests remain with Mr. Lawson. He paused, surveying the courtroom. I am also referring the bank documents to the Territorial Banking Commissioner for review. This court is adjourned. The bang of the gavel seemed to release a flood of emotion in Sophia. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming relief. She was free. Legally, officially free. Dakota's hand tightened around hers. You did it, he murmured. Mr. Harrison turned to Sophia with a satisfied smile. Congratulations, Miss Lawson. It's unusual for a divorce to be granted so readily, especially to a wife. Your testimony was compelling. Thank you for your help, Sophia said sincerely, still struggling to process the reality of her new status. Across the room, Victor stood abruptly, his face a mask of cold fury. For a moment, his gaze locked with Sophia's, and the hatred there sent a chill through her. Then, without a word, he strode from the courtroom, Mr. Fletcher hurrying after him. He won't accept this easily, Sophia said quietly to Dakota as they left the courthouse. Probably not, Dakota agreed. But he's a businessman at heart. Once the banking commissioner starts looking into his affairs, he'll have bigger concerns than you. They walked toward Dakota's wagon, which was hitched outside the general store. The summer day was bright and clear, the sky an endless blue overhead. Sophia breathed deeply, feeling as though she were truly filling her lungs for the first time in years. What now? Dakota asked as he helped her into the wagon. Sophia smiled, the expression coming naturally and without effort. Now, she said, I start living again. The following weeks were a time of transition and renewal. Sophia moved into a small room above the millinery shop, which Sarah offered at a modest rent. With the first installment of her alimony, she purchased simple furniture and clothing, establishing a frugal but independent household. Mr. Harrison helped her secure a position assisting the town's aging schoolteacher, with the understanding that she would likely take over fully when Mrs. Prentice retired the following year. The work was fulfilling, allowing Sophia to rediscover her love of teaching while providing a small but steady income. Throughout this period of change, Dakota remained a constant presence in her life. He rode into town several times a week, ostensibly for supplies but inevitably finding his way to wherever Sophia happened to be. They shared meals at the restaurant, walked along the river, though never crossing the bridge where she had tried to end her life, and talked for hours about books, dreams, and the future. As autumn approached, painting the cottonwoods along the river gold and crimson, their relationship deepened. The possibility they had spoken of on the porch swing that night before the hearing began to take more definite shape, though neither rushed to define it. Victor, as predicted, did not accept defeat graciously. He appealed the divorce ruling, though the territorial court upheld Judge Parker's decision. More seriously, he found himself under investigation by banking authorities, who arrived unexpectedly one day and spent a week examining every record in the bank. The outcome was devastating for Victor. Evidence of mismanagement and fraud was sufficient to force his resignation and the sale of his controlling interest in the bank. Within a month, he had left Willow Creek, reportedly for Denver or perhaps further east. His departure lifted the last shadow from Sophia's new life. Though the gossip about her divorce persisted for a time, it gradually gave way to acceptance and even admiration from some quarters. Several women in similar situations sought her advice privately, drawing courage from her example. One crisp October evening, Dakota invited Sophia for a ride to his ranch. I want to show you something, he said mysteriously when he collected her after school. The aspens were at their peak, their golden leaves shimmering in the late afternoon sunlight as they rode east out of town. Dakota seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with the reins and starting conversations only to let them trail off unfinished. When they reached the ranch, Dakota helped Sophia down from her horse and led her not toward the cabin but along a path that wound behind it, up a gentle slope crowned with pines. At the top, Sophia gasped at the view. Miles of rolling countryside spread before them, the distant mountains etched against the sky, the river a silver ribbon winding through golden meadows. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I had no idea this was here." "I come up here to think," Dakota said, standing beside her. "To remember why I chose this place after the war." Sophia understood. After the chaos and carnage he'd witnessed, this peaceful vista must have been healing for him, just as his quiet strength had been healing for her. "There's something else I wanted to show you," he continued, taking her hand and guiding her to where a small clearing had been made among the pines. In the center stood the framework of a house, just the foundation and the beginnings of walls, but unmistakably a home in the making. "Dakota?" Sophia questioned, turning to him in confusion. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly boyish in his uncertainty. "I started building it about a month ago. It's not much yet, but it will be a proper house when it's finished. 2 bedrooms, a good-sized kitchen, windows that catch the morning sun." "But why?" Sophia asked, though something in her heart already knew the answer. Dakota took both her hands in his green eyes earnest in the fading light. "Because I love you, Sophia. I think I've loved you since I pulled you from that river and you looked at me with those defiant eyes, even half drowned. I love your courage, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've rebuilt your life piece by piece." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "You showed me what real strength looks like, not domination or control, but support and respect. I want to build a life with you," Dakota said, gesturing toward the half-finished house. "Not now, not until you're ready. You've just gained your independence, and I would never ask you to surrender it. But when the time is right, if you want it to, this place is for us." Sophia looked at the simple structure, then back at the man before her, this honest, honorable man who had saved her in more ways than one. In his eyes, she saw not possession but partnership, not authority but equality. "Yes," she said simply. "When the time is right, I want that too." Dakota's face lit with a joy that transformed his weathered features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, then deepening with the certainty of their feelings for each other. When they finally parted, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted. "After the war, I figured I was too damaged, too solitary." "And I thought love was just another cage," Sophia replied. "But it's not, is it? Not when it's real." "No," Dakota agreed. "Real love gives you wings." They stood together as the sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Two people who had found each other against all odds, a woman who had tried to end her life in a river, and the cowboy who had pulled her out and said, "Not while I'm breathing." 5 years later, the house on the hill was a home in every sense of the word. Expanded from Dakota's original plan, it now boasted a wide porch where Sophia liked to sit in the evenings, grading papers from her students or simply watching the changing light on the distant mountains. Inside, the walls were lined with bookshelves filled with their combined collections, Dakota's classics, besides Sophia's poetry, joined now by picture books and simple readers for their daughter, Emily, who at 4 years old was already showing signs of inheriting her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet determination. Dakota had expanded his ranch operations, now running a respectable herd of cattle and breeding horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Sophia continued teaching at the Willow Creek school, having taken over fully when Mrs. Prentice retired as expected. Her innovative teaching methods and genuine care for her students had earned her the respect of the community, the painful history of her first marriage now largely forgotten in light of her current happiness. Victor Lawson had never returned to Willow Creek. Occasional news filtered back he had moved to San Francisco, remarried, established himself in business there. Sophia wished him no ill, but neither did she waste energy thinking of him. The scars he had left were healed, though she would always carry the lessons of that dark time. On this particular evening, Dakota returned from checking the herd to find Sophia on the porch, Emily on her lap as they read together. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene the woman he loved, their child, the home they had built together. It never failed to fill him with wonder, this family that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. "Papa," Emily called, spotting him. She scrambled from Sophia's lap and ran to him, her dark braids bouncing with each step. Dakota scooped her up, swinging her high before settling her on his hip. "Hello, sunshine. Have you been helping Mama? We read 3 books," Emily reported proudly, "and I helped feed the chickens." "She's a born rancher," Sophia said, smiling as she rose to greet her husband, just like her father. Dakota leaned in to kiss her, still marveling that he could do so freely, that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. "How was school today?" "Chaotic," Sophia admitted. "The Jenkins twins decided to bring a snake to class. But we managed to return it to the wild with minimal screaming." Dakota laughed, setting Emily down. "That's my brave wife." After dinner, when Emily had been tucked into bed with a story and kisses from both parents, Dakota and Sophia sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they shared a comfortable silence born of deep understanding. "I had a letter from Sarah today," Sophia said eventually. "She and Thomas are expecting their 3rd child in the spring." "That's wonderful news," Dakota replied. "We should invite them out for Sunday dinner soon." "I'd like that." Sophia paused, then added casually, "Actually, they might not be the only ones with news to share." Dakota turned to look at her, his expression questioning. "Oh." Sophia smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "I think Emily might be getting a little brother or sister around the same time." Joy spread across Dakota's face, followed quickly by concern. "Are you sure, after how difficult Emily's birth was?" "Doctor Wilson says I'm perfectly healthy," Sophia assured him, "and this time we know what to expect." Dakota pulled her close, his arms protective around her. "I just can't bear the thought of losing you." "You won't," Sophia promised. "I'm too stubborn to go anywhere." They sat together as full darkness fell, the night air cool but not yet cold, the sounds of their ranch settling around them, horses nickering softly in the corral, the distant lowing of cattle, Emily's gentle breathing through the open window of her room. "Do you ever think about that day at the river?" Dakota asked quietly. "Where we might be if I hadn't happened to be there at that exact moment." Sophia considered this. "Sometimes, but I prefer to think about all the days since the life we've built, the love we've found." "That moment at the river was an ending that became a beginning." Dakota nodded, understanding as he always did. "The best beginning. And the story's still being written," Sophia added, her hand resting on her stomach where their 2nd child was just beginning to make itself known. As the moon rose over the eastern hills, casting silver light across the land they had come to cherish, Dakota and Sophia Yeats sat contentedly in each other's arms, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together, a desperate leap, a timely rescue, and words that had changed everything. "Not while I'm breathing."